In our last video, we looked at how human experiences are represented. Today, let's go through a practice paper together so that you can be confident and prepared for your exam. If you are studying English Advanced or English Standard, then you will have two HSC exams for English, Paper 1 and Paper 2. The Texts and Human Experiences module will be tested in Paper 1. If you are an English Studies student, then you will only have one English exam. The Texts and Human Experiences module will be tested in Sections 1 and 2 of your exam. Basically, you will all have to complete two exam sections that test your knowledge of texts and human experiences. When you sit the exam, make sure you watch the time so that you can allocate 45 minutes working time to each section. In Section 1, you'll respond to questions about a range of short texts that you haven't seen before, and you'll have to identify how they represent human experiences. In Section 2, you'll write an extended response about your set text. Today, we'll give you some tips and tricks to help you ace Section 1. To find out more about how to tackle Section 2, check out our lessons on all the set texts for this module. Let's get started. First up, you have 10 minutes of reading time. Jump straight to the questions and figure out what they're asking. Then you'll know what to look for when you go through the texts. Let's take a look at the questions from our sample paper and identify the key words as we go. When we turn to Text 1, we will be looking for an experience shared by a group of people in the poster. According to the next question, when we read Text 2, we're on the lookout for an emotion experienced by an individual. Next, we're looking for any memories in Text 3 and how they are experienced. In Text 4, we're looking for any experiences that may challenge our assumptions and preconceptions about the world. Finally, Question 5 wants us to look at two texts. As we go through each text, we'll make note of how they want us, the responders, to think about the impacts of human experiences. Once you've read the questions, read all your texts, keeping the questions in mind. You want to understand the big message of each text so you can answer the questions clearly and directly. Don't worry too much about nitty-gritty techniques yet. You can do that on your second reading. After your 10 minutes reading time, you're ready to start answering the questions. As you do so, keep in mind how many marks each question is worth, because this is a loose guide as to how many pieces of evidence from each text you'll need. For example, if the question is worth 2 marks, you should have 2 pieces of evidence from the text. If the question is worth 5 marks, you should have 5 pieces of evidence. As you answer the questions, manage your time well by spending around 2 minutes writing for each mark. So spend 4 minutes on a 2-mark question, 8 minutes on a 4-mark question, and so on. To help plan your responses, quickly highlight aspects of the text that relate directly to the question, annotating with relevant techniques. This process is key to your success because it prepares you with enough quotes and techniques for your answers. Remember, for every piece of evidence that you discuss in your response, identify and explain a relevant language technique. Let's start going through each text. Here's our first text along with the first question. How does the poster depict a shared human experience? The question is worth 2 marks, so we're looking for 2 aspects of the poster that depict a shared human experience. To answer the question, we also need to define what shared experience the text is depicting. Let's annotate the poster together and then put together a sample response. The brightly coloured text in the title, Youth Film Festival, and the caption, Share Our Stories, tells us straight away what shared experiences the text is about. Going to a film festival where people encounter a variety of human experiences as represented in different movies. All the people on the poster are depicted using a variety of colours and symbols to evoke unique individual identities. We see men and women from all kinds of different backgrounds. So the experience of going to a film festival can be shared by all kinds of people. The gridding pattern unites the people despite their unique identities. Notice how all the images are silhouettes? That means that only the outline of each image is given, rather than being filled in with a detailed face. Silhouettes allow the viewer to imaginatively fill in the gaps of each image, suggesting that they could be depicting anyone. Thus, the viewer can imagine themselves in the picture too. This is a great persuasive strategy aiming to convince all kinds of people to come to the festival. Remember, this is a 2-mark question, so if you didn't identify all those techniques and ideas yourself, that's okay. You only need to identify 2 aspects of the image that relate to the question. A couple of sentences is fine. Only spend around 4 minutes on this response. There's no need to write an essay. Have a look at our sample response. Here, we analyse the graphics and their placement in the image. An answer discussing other elements of the poster would also have worked too. Visual texts in the exam will always be full of techniques and ideas for you to choose from. You can pause the video to read the response more closely. Let's move on to the next question. Analyse how the poet conveys an individual emotional experience. The question is worth 3 marks, so we need 3 aspects of this poem that talk about the emotions experienced by an individual. The question word analyse is also important. According to the Nessa glossary, analyse means to identify components and the relationship between them, draw out and relate implications. In other words, we need to figure out different elements of the poem and how they link to each other. Let's do that now. If you want to learn more about how to analyse poetry, check out the Perfecting Poetry lessons in our Stage 6 English Essentials series. First up is the title, Talking to Grief by Denise Levertov. Immediately, we know that the poem is about the emotional experience of grief. Now, let's look at the first stanza, that is, the first paragraph of the poem. Notice how the poet uses apostrophe or direct address to confront the emotion of grief. This suggests that grief is a powerful and complex experience. Then the speaker uses a simile, comparing grief to a homeless dog. This shows that the poet initially doesn't respect grief or want to engage with her own sadness. She's ignoring it, like you would ignore a homeless dog. Here's the second stanza. The speaker keeps expanding the extended imagery of the homeless dog. Extended imagery is when the poet develops a particular image over several lines, or, as in this case, over the whole poem. The image of the dog becomes a metaphor representing her grief. Now she wants to invite the dog into the house to care for it. This contrasts with her earlier rejection of grief. She's starting to engage with her emotions and actually think about her sadness more deeply. Now let's turn to the third and final stanza. As we've seen earlier, the speaker continually uses the second person to talk to her grief. That means she always addresses her grief as you. Check out the repetition of the word you at the beginning of each sentence. This structured repetition is called anaphora. This contrasts with the first 2 stanzas, where most of the sentences began with I. The speaker has grown a lot in her appreciation of grief. Even though it's a difficult and confronting emotion, she's ready to embrace it rather than suppress it. The last sentence expresses this idea well. Her grief will symbolically consider my house your own and will become like the speaker's own dog. This represents her willingness to take ownership of her emotional experience. Now that we've annotated the poem, let's put together a response. Remember, the question is only worth 3 marks. You don't need to cram in everything that you've noticed about the text. Stay smart, manage your time, and just pick 3 things about the poem that link directly to the question. Have a look at our sample response. We've analysed 3 quotes that demonstrate the speaker's individual emotional experience of managing grief. You might want to pause the video to read the response more closely. Next up is a fiction extract from Truman Capote's short story, A Christmas Memory. The question is, explain how text 3 represents the importance of memory as a human experience. According to the Nessa glossary, the question word explain requires us to relate cause and effect, making the relationships between things evident, provide why and or how. In other words, we need to show clearly how quotes from the story link to a big idea about memory as a human experience. Let's go through the story and annotate aspects of the story that will help us answer the question. If you want to find out more about how to analyse prose texts, check out the Powering Through Prose lesson in our Stage 6 English Essentials series. Here's the first paragraph. The extract starts with an imperative or command. Imagine a morning in late November. The narrator, that is, the voice telling the story, directly addresses the readers, inviting us to share their memory through our imagination. Then we read a list of details, including references to time and descriptions of the furniture. All this helps to establish the setting, immersing us in the imaginative world of the text. It's like we're really there, in the narrator's kitchen, over 20 years ago. Let's see what happens next. The narrator continues to pack the story with lists of details that bring the narrative to life. This time, he describes an old woman. She's got white hair and she's wearing tennis shoes, a grey sweater and a calico dress. A simile compares her to a bantam hen, which is a colourful and energetic type of chicken. This makes her personality seem fun and energetic, so it's sad when the simile is contrasted with a mention of her long, youthful illness and her pitifully hunched shoulders. But overall, we still get the impression that she is a warm and friendly person. Check out the dialogue of her exclamation, "Oh my, it's fruitcake weather!" Again, we see her playful and vibrant personality. Summing up, this characterisation, that is, the way the author has represented her distinct qualities, is given with a loving and affectionate tone. So the narrator has very fond memories of this woman. Now we're up to the last paragraph. By now, you may have noticed that the whole text is in present tense. That is, the actions are described as if they're happening right now. For example, the narrator says, "I am 7, she is 60-something." Even though the story is set in the past, it's still a strong memory for the narrator. That's why it's in present tense. Memory is also important to the old woman. She calls the narrator Buddy, in memory of her best friend from long ago. Even though the woman is old, she is metaphorically still a child, suggesting her childhood memories are so vivid that they seem like the present day to her. As you can see, this whole extract is all about how powerful memory can be, which is perfect because the question wants us to explain how the text represents the importance of memory as a human experience. It's a 3-mark question, so you need to pick 3 aspects of the story that relate to the question. Have a go writing a response to the question yourself, using some of the techniques and quotes that we've analysed together. Here's a sample response that discusses the opening imperative and the description of the old woman, linking each quote to the importance of memory as a human experience. Pause the video to read the response more closely. Now we're up to the next question. Analyse how the text explores the power of experiences to challenge our assumptions about the world. 6 marks. So let's go through the text and find any assumptions that are challenged by particular experiences. If you want to learn more about how to analyse non-fiction, check out the Nailing Non-Fiction lesson in our Stage 6 English Essentials series. Let's get started. The title of the feature article grabs our attention with the imperatives, get in there, get dirty. The blunt commands suggest that the text will be about a very confronting experience. Sure enough, the rest of the title tells us that the writer, Benjamin Law, lived homeless for 10 days. The experience is all for a TV show, Filthy Rich and Homeless. Contrasting rich and homeless seems like an oxymoron or contradiction. What would it be like to watch 5 privileged Australians react to the experience of various forms of homelessness? Even though technically the homelessness is a conceit, that is, fake, and even though all the participants get to return to normal life, ironically, the experience still impacts Law a lot. Let's take a look at the next section of the article. The emotive language, blunt shock, surprises us, contrasting with the previous discussion of how the experience is technically just a conceit. Law wants us to know that his emotional experience was very much genuine. Look at the truncated or shortened sentences in the next paragraph. No toothbrush, no water, no money. The tricolon, or list of 3 phrases, is punctuated by the insistent anaphora of no, emphasising how confronting it is for Law to experience life without what he would normally consider basic necessities. Yet he uses logical language to explain the experience. This makes sense. For many homeless Australians, sadly, it is very normal to live without access to these items. Law's experience has challenged his assumptions of what is normal life, as we can see in the descriptions of how he spent the next 10 days. His personal anecdote, that is, a story from his own experience, helps his readers relate to and connect with what it's like to be homeless, as we imagine Law hunting for food and water in rubbish bins and sleeping rough. Then Law moves on to some statistics. Wow, these statistics are pretty shocking. Did you know that around 8,200 people in Australia sleep on the streets every night, and thousands more don't have secure housing? Juxtaposing these statistics with the previous anecdote, that is, putting them next to each other, connects Law's individual experience with what thousands of other people go through all the time. Law has learnt that there's a whole metaphorical world of homelessness in every city. This shows that his previous assumptions about what is normal have been completely overturned. Being confronted with the reality of homelessness prompts Law to think about solutions to the problem. Unfortunately, the proven solutions are poorly funded, neglected, and demonised. This tricolon creates a grim tone, opposing any preconceptions the readers might have that there is an easy way to fix the problem of homelessness. What's more, Law ends the article with powerful inclusive language, that is, words such as we and us that include the reader. The article concludes as Law argues that at the end of the day, it's up to us as voters to make positive change in society. This destabilises the assumption that homelessness is basically someone else's problem. Now that we've annotated the text, let's get back to the question, analyse how the text explores the power of experiences to challenge our assumptions about the world. It's worth 6 marks, so we need to discuss 6 pieces of evidence from the text that show how experiences challenge assumptions about the world. How about you have a go answering the question yourself? Use some of the techniques and analysis that we've discussed together to put together your response. Here's our sample answer. Notice how we've started off with a sentence that directly answers the question in relation to the text. That's our topic sentence. Next, we've chosen 6 pieces of evidence that support the main point. Here are our first 3 pieces of evidence. And here are 3 more pieces of evidence. Finally, we've finished the answer with another sentence that summarises our big idea. We can call this sentence our linking sentence because it links our response back to the question. Take time now to go back, pause, and read the analysis carefully. So far, all the questions that we've looked at address one text each. However, if you are studying English Advanced or English Standard, you'll have at least one question that asks you to compare texts. You will not have to compare 2 texts if you are an English Studies student. Here's the last question that English Advanced and English Standard students will need to respond to. Compare how 2 texts invite the responder to consider the impacts of human experiences. This question is worth 6 marks, so you need 3 pieces of evidence from each text. Choose the 2 texts that you are most comfortable with and understand the best. Then pick out evidence from your 2 chosen texts that relates to the question. Also, keep in mind the question word compare, which the NESA glossary defines as show how things are similar or different. So identify some specific similarities and differences between your 2 texts. Looking back, we could talk about how the exciting emotional impact of seeing movies is portrayed in the film poster. We could compare that to our poem, which explores the speaker's struggle to embrace the emotional consequences of losing someone. Or we could revisit the short story extract and think about how remembering an experience from long ago causes the narrator to reflect on the impact of their childhood. Of course, the feature article would also work well. We would discuss how the readers are positioned to respond to Law's experiences. Have a go putting together a quick response now. Here's our sample response that compares texts 3 and 4. Notice how we've started off with a brief introduction to our chosen texts. Next, we've written a quick paragraph on each text. Because the question is worth 6 marks, we've chosen 3 pieces of evidence for each paragraph. Here's our first paragraph, which is all about Capote's short story. And here's our second paragraph, which talks about Law's feature article. Finally, we've finished the answer with a quick conclusion that links back to the question. Also, because the question asks us to compare, we mention how the texts are similar or different. Congratulations! We've just worked through the reading comprehension section of your English exam. If you want to learn more about how to tackle a particular text type, check out our Stage 6 English Essentials series. If you want to learn more about your set text for this module, check out the rest of our Texts and Human Experiences series. You're well on the way to conquering HSC English. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. To review all lessons on Texts and Human Experiences rubric, feel free to go back and watch them again to improve your understanding of this module.